My name is Kevin West. I'm originally from East Tennessee, Blount County, up against the Smoky Mountains. I divide my time these days between Los Angeles and the Berkshires in western Massachusetts. I am an author, a journalist. I wrote a cookbook called Saving the Season about canning and preserving. My interest in preserving started with a memory, as a lot of food journeys begin with a memory. My family's from East Tennessee originally on both sides. One side are farmers, the other side are hillbillies. And both of them were preservers. Both grandmothers preserved when I was growing up. And they, just as a matter of course, they would make 14-day sweet crunch pickles and blackberry jam and muscadine wine and strawberry jam and all of that kind of stuff that people would just do year in and year out on the farm or in other parts of the rural South. But that was a long time ago. It was back in the 70s. Cut to more recent years, I was living in Los Angeles and I went to a farmer's market one morning in April, and it was strawberry season there. And I was just overwhelmed with excitement when I saw this table full of red and fragrant berries. So I bought a whole flat of berries and I'm carrying them back to the car on my shoulder like this. And I realized that there was no way I could possibly eat that many berries before they went bad. And in that moment, I thought about Grand strawberry jam. Grand was my dad's mob. And I decided to make some. I decided I wanted to make Grand strawberry jam. Grand was already gone by then, so I didn't have anyone to really tell me how you do it. And this was back in like 2007, I guess, before there were so many good and reliable preserving resources available. So I kind of had to just figure it out myself. I was a comfortable, confident cook. I spent a lot of time in the kitchen. I thought, oh, this can't be that hard. Take some fruit and take some sugar, and the results were just horrible. And I was so disappointed, because I had this perfect memory of Grand strawberry jam. I had that perfect memory, and the results were so bad. And so the whole preserving journey, which took about 5 years from that moment until I came out with the book, Saving the Season. The whole preserving journey was about trying to figure out how to recreate Grand jam, how to sort of make preserves the way that I wanted them to taste. Did this book, Saving the Season, which was, like I said, it was my attempt to make a whole range of preserves that tasted exactly the way I wanted to taste them. It was to take the Southern preserving tradition and to bring it into the 21st century and to show that the Southern preserving tradition, which after all derived from a number of multicultural sources, could continue in the 21st century to absorb and reflect other contemporary influences and inspirations, such as California cuisine, such as the various Latin cuisines that are part of everyday life in Los Angeles. So that's the idea of Saving the Season. Is how do you take this great and really venerable preserving tradition and make it relevant to our lives today now. I always liked to eat. I always liked to be in the kitchen with my grandmother. I always liked to be in the garden with my grandfather. I could always eat a lot when I was young. Gran used to say I must have a hollow leg because I could just shovel down 4 or 5 plates of food. And the west side of the family, we all like food and we all pay a lot of attention to food. The West are farmers, and my father and Uncle David live on farms and still do some farming. They certainly have big gardens that they eat out of themselves. And the Wests like to talk about food. And I go into this a little bit in Saving the Season that when I say that when the West are talking about food, they're really not just talking about food. They're talking about a particular way of living in a particular place with a care for the land and the people on the land and the traditions of the community, and a concern about how to transmit those values across the generations. So, talking about food, like what was Granny Dad's favorite field pea, You know, what kind of melon does Pawpaw grow? You know, why does Uncle David grow a different melon than Pawpaw grows? Talking about these kinds of things, talking about Gran's, you know, cherry pie recipes, talking about who makes the best chow chow and like what are the variations of chow chow. Talking about all these things are a way of talking about food, but they're also a way of talking about the family and about family traditions. So all of that stuff from when I was little was interesting to me. You know, like you get to eat and it tastes good, but then there are also all the stories that go along with the food. And so I think you would say that from, you know, from when I was little, I was always interested in food, but it was only a hobby, really, until I got obsessed with you know, preserves, and then it became something more than just a hobby. It became an obsession that was also a kind of professional. It was a personal obsession, but it also became a kind of professional, calling, I guess, to write about this stuff. If you say canning or if you say preserving, what do people think? Everybody thinks botulism, right? Everyone gets into a panic about botulism. Oh, I don't want to kill my friends and family with botulism. I'm here to say that the science of preserving is very well understood, and it also is very reliable. Sweet preserves work because of the acidity of the fruit and because of the sugar. Pickles work because of the acidity of the vinegar or the acidity of the ferment. In both cases, acidity is the silver bullet against botulism and other pathogenic bacteria. So this is just to say that you are not going to kill your friends and family with jam or with pickles because the science behind it, you don't have to understand the science, but you just can know that the science behind preserving is reliable enough that they were doing it here, you know, 200 and some odd years ago, and my grandmother was doing it in, you know, eastern Tennessee, whatever that is, 40 years ago, and I'm doing it now in, you know, sort of in LA and the Berkshires, you know, and it worked then and it works now. So it's not anything to be skittish about. You know, like if you can bake a cake, you can definitely make a pot of pickles. Preserves today are about preserving not just food, but are about preserving traditional foodways. It's about preserving family memories. It's about preserving cultural identities. It's about preserving personal experiences. An example of that would be, you know, let's go out and pick some wild blackberries together, and then we'll make a big pot of blackberry jam. And then in January, when we open up a jar of that jam, we will be able to kind of recall that moment and that experience of going out and picking berries together. And that's one of the things I mean by saving the season. You know, preserving is a way to take the nutrition, the calories, and the flavors of a particular moment in the year and to capture them for use in a later moment of the year. That's saving the season. But there's also this other stuff about saving the season, you know, saving the personal experience, saving, you know, preserving or saving sort of cultural, historic, you know, traditions, regional traditions. And to me, that's why preserving really matters today. And it's like, if I were to ask you, what's your favorite family recipe for holiday cookies or Thanksgiving pies, and you would tell me what it is, and I would say then, well, what's the point of preserving that? Like, why does that matter? And you could give me all kinds of reasons, which I think would probably be very good reasons. I would say that that the preserves, recipes for preserves, you know, chow chow or peach preserves or whatever else it is, they have a similar kind of status, or they have a similar kind of stickiness, let's say, for memory, for nostalgia, for story. So when you preserve a recipe, you are also preserving a story. And that, I think, in the end, is what I'm really most obsessed with when it comes to saving the season. It is preserving a story that connects us to the past in ways that we may not even fully understand, but which we can examine and study and unpack and through that process, we can gain a richer understanding of where we as individuals, but also where we as communities and where we as cultures come from.
Did you turn this on? No.
I did not.